The United Nations Security Council has unanimously imposed new sanctions against North Korea over its 6 nuclear tests earlier this month. The sanctions cap crude oil exports to North Korea at current levels. It also includes a ban on its textile exports and prevents its laborers from getting new work permits abroad, which are key sources of income for the isolated nation.
Today we are saying the world will never accept a nuclear-armed North Korea. And today the Security Council is saying that if the North Korean regime does not halt its nuclear program, we will act to stop it ourselves.
The United States initially proposed a total ban on oil exports to North Korea, but apparently weakened the resolution following negotiations with China and Russia. Pyongyang has not responded to the new sanctions, but did threaten retaliation ahead of the vote.
China has been very reluctant to take any drastic measures that might potentially collapse North Korea's economy. So this is certainly something they were concerned about in negotiations. However, the text does keep in a ban on North Korean textiles, and last year textiles brought in nearly $1 billion, so it is a significant sector that would be cut from the country's revenue income. The new draft also drops calls to sanction North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to put in place a travel ban and an asset freeze against him. All these measures certainly adopted into the draft to win Chinese and Russian support for it. So the vote will take place later today. Margaret Bashir, VOA News, the United Nations.
Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe supports the new resolution.
I welcome the United Nations Security Council decision to swiftly and unanimously adopt much tougher sanctions on North Korea. What we need to do now is thoroughly implement the resolution.
Abe says Japan will exert its leadership to try to persuade Pyongyang to change its current policy.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has conducted more missile launches than either his father or his grandfather. Former U.S. Ambassador to South Korea, Christopher Hill, told VOA via Skype that Kim Jong-un appears to be a belligerent leader.
He does not take any responsibility for the fact that North Korea in September 2005 did agree to abandon all their nuclear programs.
Hill says it is naive to think that North Korea has been working on developing nuclear weapons for the past 50 years for defense purposes.
They have very offensive systems in mind, and I think the nuclear weapons play a role in that. And I think ultimately what they are trying to do is to create a circumstance where they can succeed in getting the U.S. off the Korean Peninsula, and then they think they could actually unify it on their terms.
The U.S. diplomat says the United States has never agreed, nor should it, to negotiate over joint military drills with South Korea, as suggested by China and Russia. In his own talks with North Korean diplomats, he said he explained that North Korea should not worry about being attacked.
All of the scenarios for all of those exercises start with the premise that North Korea has invaded South Korea, not that South Korea has invaded North Korea. So I explained that these exercises are defensive, and I told the North Koreans my only regret is that we didn't have those exercises in the summer of 1950.
With regard to a North Korean missile test, he says the United States should use missile defense only as a last resort.
The North Koreans can get information about our trajectories and how our missiles work. So I think we might want to save that for a moment where we feel that the North Korean missile in question is a direct threat.
Hill says the United States should join forces with China and North Korea's other neighbors to find a diplomatic means to get Pyongyang to stop its nuclear programs. But he says a summit between the U.S. and the Chinese presidents should be well prepared.
And it would not be prepared if Trump arrived and sat down and they just started talking about North Korea. There needs to be a diplomatic mission earlier of the kind that Kissinger performed in in China in anticipation of President Nixon's visit.
The former diplomat said the United States Department currently lacks a competent team to work on these important issues, and it is critical to form one as soon as possible. Zlatica Houk, VOA News, Washington.
The chief of the International Atomic Energy Agency says a nuclear watchdog will set up a team to focus on North Korea. Yukiya Amano describes Pyongyang's recent nuclear test as extremely regrettable.
This new test, the sixth and largest since 2006, is in complete disregard of the repeated demands of the international community.
Amano says a focused team will enhance the agency's ability to monitor the North's nuclear programs and to stay on top of verification approaches and procedures. The team will also ensure that agency inspectors are prepared for a possible return to the country. The IAEA Board of Governors is meeting in Vienna this week.
Another country is expelling a North Korean diplomat. The government of Peru is kicking out Pyongyang's ambassador to the country. Peru's foreign ministry announced the decision on Monday. The ambassador was given 5 days to leave. The ministry says the decision was made in light of the North's continued disregard for global laws. It says the country poses an unacceptable threat to peace and security. Peru's decision comes after Mexico and Spain recently expelled North Korean ambassadors. The U.S. has been calling on countries with diplomatic ties with Pyongyang to sever those relations.
Quit this commission.
And as evidence of war crimes continue to mount against the regime, the international community is seizing its opposition against Assad's rule. Rahul Radhakrishnan, TRT World. People foaming at the mouth, left gasping for air, and dying after sarin gas was dropped on Khan Sheikhoun. It took 5 months for the UN to declare that the Syrian regime was responsible for this chemical attack. And that's not the only atrocity it's been accused of during this war. The regime is suspected of executing at least 13,000 in Sednaya prison, bombing civilian areas, and starving besieged towns to submission. And as world leaders meet at the UN headquarters just days after the latest findings, Syrians continue to ask what action they will take.
This is the place where the whole world has gathered and said it's the regime who targeted this place. But regime forces keep denying it. The UN recently held the regime accountable for this crime. Although the evidence was clear from the beginning, I filmed this massacre and the chemical attack.
Nearly 100 people died in the early hours of April the 4th, many in their sleep. But videos filmed that night of the attack are apparently not convincing enough for the regime.
We don't know whether those dead children, were they killed in Khan Sheikhoun, were they dead at all, who committed the attack if there was attack, what the material, you have no information at all, nothing at all, no one investigated.
The regime cooperated with the international community to remove its chemical stockpiles in 2014. But many experts believe some supplies were undeclared and withheld.
And the Syrian authorities declared a very small part, which was not satisfactory from my point of view.
Many Syrians, including Adam, have now started to believe that statements, even by the UN, are not worth the paper they're written on.
The UN statements 5 months after the crime is nothing more than ink on paper. The Syrian regime who committed this crime is still out there, doing whatever they want. The killing of women and children and men in this brutal way should be punished with a decisive decision, not with the Russian and Chinese veto.